Welcome to Reimagine, a monthly hour-long show hosted by Reclaim Philadelphia and Philly Cam, bringing together leaders to discuss how policy impacts lived experiences of working-class Black and Brown communities and how we hope to imagine better futures together and offer steps for real transformative change. This program is part of Philly Cam's People Power Media Fest, their annual month-long celebration of community media and membership. This year, we are focused on sharing the ways our media can be a form of community care. Be sure to catch conversations, workshops, and special programming focused on ways storytelling cultivates care. Tune in to be part of the fest on cable, radio, and online. For more information, you can visit ppmfest.org.
This month, our show will be digging into how community justice organizations are imagining and offering transformative alternatives to the criminal legal system that has led to mass incarceration of our communities here in Philadelphia.
Today's show will feature a panel of leaders from organizations Amistad Law, Youth Empowerment for Advancement Philly, Youth Art and Self Empowerment Project, as well as our own Mass Lib organizer from Reclaim, Katia Pérez.
We're also excited to share videos throughout our program from Amistad Law's Practical Abolition animated series. This collaboration with Philly papercut artist Eric Ruin and music by Philly musician John Morrison stakes out a creative path and uplifting alternatives to policing to help reimagine another world together.
There's a lot of talk about putting more cops in the neighborhoods hardest hit by gun violence. We've been doing this for decades. Think about it for a second. Over the past 40 years, we've increased police budgets across the country by over $70 billion. And we haven't put a dent in street violence in major cities around the country. One problem with that equation in the first place is that cops are around to react to situations and deal with the aftermath, not to prevent them in the first place. Imagine if instead of sending more police into an area, we mobilized resources to the zip codes hardest hit by gun violence. The problems our communities face with gun violence are a result of race and class-based structural inequalities, not moral failing. A lot of gun violence springs from people in poverty filtering into the drug economy in pursuit of a middle-class standard of living. By diverting money from the police to the community, we could create guaranteed livable wage job programs, fixing up and beautifying the neighborhoods hardest hit by gun violence. Imagine if kids being tempted to work on the corner had the option to work a good paying job fixing up their neighborhoods. They could clean up litter and illegal dumping, help with minor home repair for the elderly, and help beautify the public spaces in our neighborhoods. As part of this emergency mobilization of resources to the zip codes hardest hit by gun violence, we could also extend rec center and library hours in those neighborhoods, so young people have positive places to go. We could also hire trauma counselors to help people heal and to help us break free from cycles of violence. We could treat gun violence like the public health problem that it is. Instead of investing in policing our people, let's invest in helping them.
This is a truly beautiful series, and I'm excited to welcome Kris Henderson from Amistad Law, the organization behind the series, to our panel. I'd also like to welcome Kendra Van de Water from YAF Philly, Mai Lee from YASP, and Katia Pérez, who is one of Reclaim Philadelphia's mass liberation organizers. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
I love this clip because it does a great job of highlighting some of the structural factors underpinning community violence in our neighborhoods and how keeping folks in poverty and out of the formal economy pushes them into illicit economies. Kendra, what resources are missing for our youth and community members that are pushing them into these underground economies for survival?
So at Yeah Philly, we focus on a lot of things that are barriers for people in terms of access to just basic needs. So people need food in their homes. They need, their vital documents. They need IDs, and all of these things cost money. They need home repairs. They need help with their bills. So I think a lot of times we try to tell young people to get jobs when really we have to help them get to those points, and those things include helping young people get access to those things I just listed.
I would love to also hear your answer if you want to answer that question as well.
Yeah, just from talking about my experience on how I needed some kind of resource to help me get back into the community. Um, the project I work for, Youth Art and Self Empowerment Projects, they helped me transition back into society. Like any research for jobs, anything I wanted to do, and like housing, anything like that. When I first came home, yes, were able to connect me with other resources, and I feel as though young people and people in general need that support. It's like you planting a seed for them, and they sprout and they grow to whatever they want to do. You gotta be able to plant that seed to help people. So that's how I feel about it.
Sergio, throwing it back to you.
Sorry, y'all. We always talk about interpersonal violence in our community, but we often leave out state violence. What is the legacy of state violence in destabilizing our communities? And I'd like to start with you, Kris, first.
I think when we're talking about state violence in this country, we have to go back to the origin of the country, and looking at slavery, and the ways in which that violence impacts disproportionately Black communities across the country. Um, there's like a pretty clear line from the legacy of slavery to the criminal legal system that we have currently. And over the centuries of this country's existence, there have been different systems whose purpose was to control Black people, especially, but other people of color as well, poor people, um, and that's what we see now with the criminal legal system. Um, when we're looking at communities where there is a lot of interpersonal violence, where there's like violence within the community, the only thing that the state really does to try and mitigate that, solve that, is send police, um, be tough on crime, surveil people. Um, none of which actually get at the actual root of what's going on, and all of which are different forms of violence in and of themselves. Um, and so I think, like, to the last question, the things that people were talking about, that our community members actually need, that young people actually need, that would allow people to thrive and to live happy, full lives. Um, all these things are possible, but require resources, require the state to do something different.
Um, Another thing that like comes up for me when I think of state violence too, right, is also like you have incarceration, but you have also probation and parole, right? Like prolonged monitoring from the state on individuals who've been incarcerated. Um, it it gets in the way of housing. First of all, if you rent, right, and you're on parole, the parole board, the parole officer will actually have to like reach out to your landlord to make sure it's okay to house you, right? Let's say if you're trying to get like back home and be with your family, there's just like a lot of things that get in the way of folks who are trying to integrate back into society, of being able to like pick themselves back up, right? Of course, also when you do have a criminal like a record, um, and if you are on probation or parole, it does make it more difficult to get employment. Like when I think of like state violence, it has like a stranglehold on you. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately because at Reclaim we have our Rethink Community Safety campaign, and we've been doing a lot of street canvassing. And I will hear from people who've been incarcerated for prolonged periods of time, 10, 15, 20 years, where they will say, oh, like I was young, I was a menace to society. I hear this from a lot of people, right? A lot of people close to me too, that they feel like incarceration was like something that reformed them. And it's like, that's what we're told, right? That's what our communities are told. um, and as part of that brain, like state violence is also that psychological brainwashing that happens in our communities that has us thinking that um, you know our folks don't deserve second chances, right? That we have to be locked up in cages. It's, for me, it's just that legacy of like what it does to our communities, to our people psychologically too.
Yeah, that's all real. I wanted to ask like Kendra and Maya. Kendra, like how have you seen state violence impacting the communities that you're working with in West Philadelphia?
Definitely all those ways. I mean, a large amount of our young people are involved in the system, whether it be the juvenile system or the adult system, and a lot of those things, right? Like with housing, with jobs. And again, we tell people the things that they need to do, but we do not work with them to help them achieve these things. But specifically, a lot of our young people are on GPS and probation. And there are so many studies that show that probation being prolonged and the supervision and the monitoring, it does not change the outcomes that we're looking for. But what does change the outcomes, whether it be legal or just holistically, are when you have the resources for these young people, right? Like our program knows that young people who come to us on house restrictions, are they going to violate probation and GPS? Yes, because they are 16 and 17 years old, right? And these are the things that young people, they leave the house when they're not supposed to. They cannot stay in the house all day. And just even focusing on house restrictions, no young person should be forced to be at in-home detention or house restrictions where they literally cannot leave their house all day. That is just not good for anybody and their well-being. But specifically when you're in that age range as a kid, you should not be bound to those restrictions. The housing specifically too, like we're looking into purchasing a place for permanent supportive housing because while we have money to house people and relocate people, when we call these apartments or landlords, and I know it's gotten worse over COVID, the first thing they say is, oh, we don't rent to those type of people. Even if we are paying rent for a year, they're still not willing to rent to someone who is dealing with probation or has an active case, no matter what that case is. And for us, that's discrimination because at the end of the day, we're housing people that can live on their own. It's just these barriers come from state sanctioned supervision and violence. And we have to start thinking about these things very differently.
That's so important to think about, and like how, like what does redlining in today's world look like? And I think it's very much like what you're describing. Maya, I wanted to bring you into this conversation too, because I know that you've been working with a lot of youth that's been impacted by these same systems. What are your thoughts?
Just to piggyback on what Kendra said, like I agree with everything she said as well because um just noticing we have like let's say we have a young person that's on house arrest and they're looking for housing and we're trying to help them look for housing. 9 times out of 10 it's gonna be hard because we have to physically ask the landlord, hey, this person is currently fighting the case. Are you able to let them, you know, pay rent and have their house arrest here? And 9 times out of 10, these landlords are not agreeing today because they already do background checks on people. If they do background checks on people, if they got any records, what makes you think they're going to allow people to have house arrest at the place? So it's just like you are already doing background checks and y'all are discriminating people who on house arrest still fighting their case. They're not even got convicted yet. It's just overall just bring the community down and like gentrification around Philly right now is hard to find housing, affordable housing for a lot of these young people and people in general. yeah, just speaking of like my experience too, like I was trying to look for an apartment, and since I have a background, I wasn't able to. I was getting like denied and wasn't able to rent at certain places. Still to this day, it's like 3 years later, I'm still not able to. And one of the apartments that they did let me, I had to explain to them like, hey, I know I had this case, but I wasn't convicted of such and such. So it's a lot that young people have to deal with, especially for housing. It's just like in Philly, how just like all the prices are going up. It's nothing affordable for people to even rent nowadays, and not even that, people doing background checks and not allowing people who want parole or house arrest to even be able to even get a chance to rent at their at their place.
Yeah, and those boundaries that you're naming are the things that are keeping a lot of folks that have been impacted by the system from being able to heal and come back into the communities and be successful. I'm really excited about this series and including it in the program, Kris, about this practical abolitional series. I also love the Everyday Philadelphians Want to Defund the Police series y'all also did. What inspired y'all at Amistad to take on these kind of video projects?
Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, we went from doing a lot of work in person with impacted community members to really being pretty isolated from people. Um, and so the first sort of video project that we did was the Everyday Philadelphians Want to Defund the Police. It was also in this moment in the fall of 2019 where we had begun to, was it 2020? Um, or like after the budget fight, one of the main criticisms that we heard about the demand to defund the police was that it was coming from white progressives who were moving in different parts of the city, but not from long-term community members, black and brown people, poor people who had lived here for their whole lives, some of them for generations. And so we talked with different folks who we'd been working with about what they would want to do uh, to make their community safer without cops, or with fewer cops, or with cops that had a lot less resources. And so, we ended up interviewing 8 Black women from different parts of the city, all of whom had loved ones, have loved ones who are locked up in Pennsylvania state prisons, about what they would want to do. Um, and so, the pandemic has, in a lot of ways, with our like media work, um, brought a lot of opportunities. We also now have a podcast that we started during the pandemic. And then we had talked at different points in time about working with this artist, Eric Ruin. Um, and it was kind of like, well, this is maybe now a perfect time to do something like this. And we had this idea for an animated uh, video series of videos that could be put on social media, where we wanted to talk about abolition in ways that weren't just academic and like talking about like the theory behind it, but that would get us closer to the world that we want to live in.
Yeah, and I really love that series. And I'll also shout out that me and Eric used to walk dogs in West Philly together for the same company. So love seeing his art. Um, I guess with now, I think that brings us. This is a great conversation, but I think we can now pause it and maybe go on to the next video from the Practical Abolition series.
What if we reduced the police budget and hired people who have street credibility to go in and interrupt the cycle of violence? We've seen the outcome of street violence both in terms of loss of life and in terms of decades spent in prison. There are a lot of people who were part of the game and part of street violence who've spent decades in prisons turning their lives around, including a lot of people sentenced to life without parole who are currently set to die in prison because they killed someone in retaliation for the death of a family member or a friend, for example. What if we created a fully funded, professionally run program with these returning citizens and others who were formerly part of the drug economy to intervene when a shooting happens? We could be credible messengers. We could be a positive strike force who keep an ongoing presence in neighborhoods across the city. When a shooting happens, we could reach out to people directly impacted and try to dissuade people from retaliation. Preventing violence is a full-time job. In addition to responding directly to crises, we could run education programs for the youth, serve as street counselors, and connect people to resources to remedy problems in their lives. We could help the kid work in the corner prevent his grandma's foreclosure by connecting her to housing counselors. Maybe that could help him get out of the game. We could connect people who are trying to overcome addiction with drug treatment resources. And maybe our work could go beyond just stemming the tide. Our neighborhoods need healing. Maybe we could also be trained to facilitate neighborhood-based restorative justice programs where we could create some healing, or at least help settle old beefs so they don't flare up again. We can stop the violence if we use our imagination and creativity, but that won't be enough. We'll need to fuel that imagination and creativity with resources. We'll need to divert money spent on policing to fund things that truly keep us safe. We might hear that these ideas are too lofty, utopian, or even expensive. But nothing we imagine, no matter how outlandish, can possibly hold any less promise or be any more costly than the way we've been going about things so far.
I like that we are thinking about what being a disruptor of violence looks like. We know that in our communities, police don't really stop violence, nor do they have the trust to move people away from cycles of violence and retaliation. Kendra, in your experience, what difference does it make to employ people with street credibility to interrupt these cycles?
I think it makes a huge difference, right? First, I want to say I love that video. I think it says a lot. It tells us a lot, and when you employ people who not only have that credibility but have built trust with people who we oftentimes as society like to stay away from, or we deem, they're into these bad things. It makes a difference because when people trust you and you can relate and understand, it makes it better to communicate and resolve issues. And we do a lot of mediating, and I think we have to normalize that, not just conversation, right? But we have to normalize that we're working through issues that are not going to be resolved in 5 minutes. They may not be resolved in even months. And so the people who come with the credibility are crucial and important because they have a perspective and an understanding, but also they have the trust of various people.
Thank you, Kendra. My same question. The importance of making sure that people with street credibility are employed in these programs for to interrupt cycles of violence.
Yeah, I would say it would be a lot of trust there. Um, Having like the cops around now is not really something the neighborhood like. Yeah, we find them safe, or we find like calling the cops or having them around is safe. Having somebody who has street credibility, they're more bound to have some kind of trust with the community and build some kind of trust around each other within the community.
Thank you, Mike. Kris, is there anything you would like to add?
I mean, I think that when like we want our movement to be led by the people who are most directly impacted by the systems that we're working to change, to fight against, to abolish, because those are the people that have the most stake in what ultimately happens, and who, because of their proximity, also have like the best ideas about how we can go about doing this work, um, and also like they have the best idea of like what risks people can take, in a way that like we don't. I think like I think there's often this like narrative around like not wanting people to take risk, and like almost wanting to like protect them from like no, you shouldn't have to do this, like other people should have to, when like in reality, um, the the self interest that people have is what makes them want to be involved in this work and like want to fight against these things, um, not like the all the other sorts of reasons that people get into this, whether it's like the idea of like helping people, um, versus like the actual lived experience that someone has.
Mm, I hear you. um, Many times, the people most impacted by the carceral system are our youth. What kind of support is your organization doing when it comes to juvenile justice?
It's a couple of different things that we're doing. I'm not sure if people heard of restorative justice, but it's where instead of a young person going through the system and fighting their justice there, we launched healing features where they're allowed to. We're getting juvenile cases right now. We're not getting like over 18 yet. We're working on that. But as far as like the younger people, we're allowed to get some of the cases that were transferred from the DA office, and we divert them instead of them going through the criminal system. Like we go through like a harm circle, whereas though everything is community based, working on these cases, and we want to show like the city like this type of stuff works. Like people don't need to go to jail or go to court to figure out and resolve why they're innocent or why they're not. Um, so they bring the person and they bring the responsible youth coming to like having conversations with both of them, letting the young people like the responsible youth having to write an apology letter or whatever the case
Mm.
might be. And towards the end of the program, we all have a conference to bring the person harmed and responsible youth, and we bring them together into a harm circle, and we have this conversation, and everybody comes together on their like the responsible youth explain to them like why they're sorry, why they're not going to do it again, and it's like it gives the young person a second chance. We're also like just supporting young people. If they do have cases, we have the youth hub. We try to support them whatever way we can as far as their court cases. Like I know when I was locked up, I didn't know any part of my court process, like what a prelim is, what arraignment is, and stuff like that. So they were able to help me navigate what each court process is. So just basically supporting these young people in whatever way we can, and like we also want to present a judge like this young person is more than what y'all say they are. They were out here doing this that and the third, but this young person was actually helping the community. They was helping their little brothers and sisters from school or whatever the case might be, and we try to present that for the judge to see. Yes, that's what we're doing right now.
And I didn't name your organization, Youth Art and Self Empowerment Project. Thank you for that, Kendra. Same question. What are y'all over at Philly doing to support folks with juvenile justice?
Yeah, so we get a lot of referrals, both juvenile and adult cases, where they're charged with violent crime. So a lot of organizations don't work with violent crime charges. And shout out to Yes for that because they're one of the few. And I want to acknowledge that the city is creating a rhetoric, around the gun violence epidemic happening, and how if you have a gun possession case or if you get caught carrying an illegal gun, you're automatically the ones committing the violence. And so a
Mhm.
lot of times for us that's not true, right? And we see that people are carrying more guns because of fear and safety from our young people. And so when they see all their friends being killed and a lot of these things that are happening that are directly impacting them, they feel that they are safe by carrying guns. So we're taking the gun cases, the possession cases and other violent charges, but we are walking them through the process. Like Mai had said, a lot of them don't understand the process. They don't know who their lawyer is. They don't know anything about what's going on. And so young people should be involved in their own case. So not only do we walk them through and we're going to every court date and advocating with them, but we are teaching them to start advocating for themselves at their own court dates. A lot of people go to court and they're like, oh, no, they didn't ask me. But this is their case. This is their life and their situation. So we're teaching them and empowering them that they should be talking to the judges and they should be talking to their lawyers about what they want. So walking them through this process, a lot of times it's what, 1 to 2.5 years, maybe more, that you're fighting a case. So providing that support throughout the process, because as we see, a lot of legal issues stem from other social issues. They may have issues from home, like we talked about. They may have, like mine mentioned, they may have siblings that they have to take care of. They have a lot of adult responsibilities as young people. So helping to address those issues, but then also showing the court that when they have different type of support, right? When they're reconnected with school, when they are getting the things they need at home, when their families are getting support and help with the young person, when they are getting therapy that they need to talk about these things, those legal outcomes change, and they always do, because we're connecting legal issues with societal issues and social issues that we're not willing to address. So we make sure the young person is at the center, and whatever they ask for and whatever they want and feel that they need, if we are not able to provide that, we create a team of people that in your legal process, you should be getting all these social determinants of health met as well.
Kendra, I definitely want to make sure I thank you for mentioning just the fact that yes, there are youth and like there are adults that I know too in the city that people just automatically assume, or at least the narrative in the city is that people carrying guns, it's because they're up to like they're gonna go crime, right? But no, like a lot of people that I know personally, it's because it's for safety reasons, right? Uh, it's just like there's just so many folks, like it's just a lot of things going on out there, and I know I hear way too often it is for safety reasons, and I thank you for like mentioning that, just because people just automatically assume people carrying guns is always because they're going to go, they have the intent to commit a crime or something. Kris, same question for you. Like at Amistad, what kind of support does Amistad do when it comes to juvenile justice?
Um, Most of the work that we do is with folks uh, who are serving life without parole. And so these are people who, at this moment, have been taken away from their communities permanently. And what that means is like there is this like this void that's left in their families, in their communities. Many people have uh, children, have nieces, nephews, cousins that they have been helping take care of. And like one of the really great things is that most of the people that we know are still able to maintain relationships, still able to provide mentorship, support to their loved ones, despite being hours away from home, despite you know being sort of at the like only being able to see their loved ones when their loved ones can make that trek out. Um, and so I'd say like most of the work that we do supporting young people comes through like our work supporting family members of people who are in prison in general. Um, there's like also like some work that we've done around juvenile life or resentencings. Um, Pennsylvania has more people who are serving life without parole than any state except Florida. And when we're looking at people who were sentenced to life without parole for crimes, homicides that occurred before they were 18, we were actually number one. Um, we had over 500 of the around 2,500 people across the country who were sentenced to juvenile life without parole. And after a U.S. Supreme Court case, all of those people had to be resentenced or otherwise made parole eligible. And so we were really happy to throw down in that fight for some of those folks to be able to get home. Um, and some of them are are home now and in our movement doing really great things.
That's great. I love hearing about all the work that we're doing and all the important points y'all brought up. I think that a lot of us are reflecting on the things that have been happening in our community here in West Philadelphia. The murder of Walter Wallace by the police last year underlined why police shouldn't be involved in addressing mental health care crises. And I know that for me, in my own experience earlier this year, I went through a really tough time with a housemate who was going through a mental health crisis. They weren't getting the kind of care and support they needed from their friends or family or from the city. And to be honest, I'm still healing from that experience. But when I was in it, I didn't know of the support I could get that didn't involve the police. So I just wanted to open this up and say, like, what would alternatives to addressing mental health crises without police look like? And yeah, I want to ask you, Kris.
So yeah, like when we're looking at the people who are killed by police, disproportionately it's people who are experiencing some sort of mental health crisis, people who are perceived to be in some sort of crisis. And so for years in Philly, there's been mobile crisis units where you can call a 10-digit number, and these people will hopefully show up. A lot of what ends up happening is that people wait for hours and they actually don't ever come. One thing that we pushed for in the last budget cycle was for an expansion to the mobile crisis unit program. There is going to be a pilot across the city of 4 teams that can run for 24 hours a day. And so what we're hoping is that those wait times will go down and people will actually be able to get the support that they need, at least on like an emergency basis. There's still the issue of like our communities not having sort of ongoing mental health resources. And still, this is like just going to be a pilot expansion, and what we want is for you to be able to call 911 and for an emergency responder to be able to show up who can support someone in crisis in the same amount of time that the cops would show up. And like what we see is that even when we're looking at the most well-resourced programs, we wouldn't be spending anywhere near the $700+ million that we spend on cops right now. And so I think there's like a lot of room to show that this could be really effective and that our communities can have more of what we need.
And I'm so glad that you're fighting for expanding these mobile crisis units. And I'll tell you, in my own experience that I mentioned, like, we tried to get them to come out and there was like only one for the city, and it was like hours of waiting for them. And what they really wanted me to say was to just say, oh, my housemate had said that they were going to harm me or they're going to harm myself. But outside of those two worlds of possibility, they didn't make the time to come out there. And so me and my housemate had to suffer through these situations for months. But thank you so much for fighting for that. I do want to, we're going to jump into the last clip from the Practical Abolition series. Thanks so much for this conversation, y'all.
In the latter half of the 20th century, companies closed down factories in American cities and moved them to places where they could pay workers less. Jobs that allowed people to save for their future were snatched away. America's prohibition on many recreational drugs and the boarding up of factories supercharged the drug economy. Some people took to substance use after being laid off. Others took jobs selling drugs, seeking fast money instead of languishing in low-wage jobs. These illegal economies encourage violence as people try to protect their merchandise and their lives. Add to that a racist war on drugs that has ripped people from our communities, and the misery becomes clearer. But we can end this toxic drug economy and the drug war that feeds mass incarceration. We can decriminalize drugs and create jobs programs. We could have regulated dispensaries and safe consumption sites where people could obtain drugs legally and use them in a safer manner. We could provide social services and addiction counseling. By legalizing drugs, we could cut down on the violence that happens in the drug economy and also cut down on overdose deaths. And by creating jobs programs offering guaranteed meaningful work that pays livable wages, we could provide an alternative to working on the corner. Where factories stand vacant, people could build low-cost housing and community centers. People who previously sold drugs could work at dispensaries or become peer counselors. As we face the realities of climate change, we could employ people to build community-based agriculture programs and other sustainable solutions. The possibilities for meaningful work which heals our communities is only as limited as our imagination. But how could we fund all this? Well, that's easy. We could tax the rich and also reduce bloated police and prison budgets. There are a lot of rich people who made a killing by creating this problem. We need the political courage to make them fix it.
So we've talked a lot about the things getting in the way of the healing, dignity, and restorative justice our communities need right now. I'd like to hear more about the solutions that our organizations here have been working on, and I'd like to start with the hashtag Care Not Control campaign and the work that they're doing to end youth incarceration. So Mike, could you tell us a little bit more about this campaign?
Yeah, so Care Not Control is a statewide campaign. I'm not sure everybody know what Act 33 is, but it was passed in like the 1995 or 1996, where it allows young people to be charged an adult. Um, and so, since Act 33 is a statewide act, we had to create a coalition that will cover the whole state. Because if you were just trying to do it in Philly, you're not going to accomplish it because it's the act is the whole Pennsylvania. So Carry Not Control, if everybody can go visit carrynotcontrol.com, they're working statewide to end this act and stop having charging young people.
Yeah, and Kris or Katia, I know I think y'all are also part of this campaign. Do y'all have other things to share?
I mean, we've signed on and support the campaign, but it's like, we definitely, we're definitely not the ones like holding down that work. Um, I don't know about you, Katia, if you have more to add.
That's actually more Ariana Morgan, who's the other mass liberation organizer at Reclaim, who's more involved. She's the person who's more involved in that campaign. But yeah, for me, it's just been great learning about what's happening just because like I know oftentimes when it comes to folks that do become basically, I'm not going to say become, they get sucked into the system, it happens in youth, right? So it's awesome to see that there are campaigns to make sure that we get at this from folks who are being sucked into the system at an early age.
I think this is like a really important thing to be talking about because, like when we think about like where does the money come for the kind of healing and care that we need for our communities, a lot of times it's like, well, why aren't we thinking about all of the money that we're spending on prisons? How about all the money that's going for the youth that are being sent to these prisons? What would it look like to actually take that money and invest it in programs that benefit youth, before they're impacted by these cycles of violence? So I'm very excited for the Care Not Control campaign. Um, Wanted to jump back to yeah, Philly. I know that y'all just had your grand opening to the public in West Philly for your location. What other events and campaigns do you have planned for your teen-led movement?
Yes, so we are in the process of hiring more and more people to keep up with the amount of young people that are in our space every day and being referred. But we do, like today, we're having our pet food giveaway. We try to give as much to the community as we can. So the ongoing pet food giveaways, pet supplies, cat litter, that's usually every 2 weeks. We usually did the weekly grocery giveaways, but we're actually renovating our 3-car garage into a store, so it's more sustainable that people can come pick up their items and we can store and buy more items that our communities want versus, just taking some donated items. So we're doing that. Um, we go on a lot of trips. Like this weekend, we're taking 20 young people camping. We've been whitewater rafting. Like we try to focus on showing young people that even in the midst of all the tragedies we're going through, right? All the things that are happening in your life, they oftentimes don't have the ability to be a kid, to enjoy things. So we also focus on that's part of our healing. Let's go outside, let's go on the water, let's do things that you've never done before, and then if you like them, we can do them again. And that peer bonding. So we're going to have a Halloween party coming up. We will share that. We're all about family, so the holiday parties that will be coming up and just the meals that we'll have together. But if you follow us on Instagram, we always post things on Instagram, on Facebook at Yeah Philly, and our website has a calendar where we can put some events as well. So we'll make sure that we share as in advance as possible that we can.
I'll tell you that I've been following y'all's social media, and I love seeing the joy like in all of those. Like I've seen the pictures of y'all rafting and going to the movies and things. I'm curious, like how have you been received in West Philadelphia, and how are people in the neighborhood responding to your style of organizing?
Yeah, I mean, I think before we got here, right, it was, oh, we don't want you here. You're bringing criminals here. That's and fear and unknown. That's a very common thing when you bring people into a neighborhood that don't look like them. So we're at 53rd and Walton, and which is pretty gentrified, and so there's been some tension and some issues in the beginning, but I think overall, I think when you don't understand the work, you try to do different things or say different things, and now it's a complete change. It's, oh, you make our neighborhood better. And I know there were two residents who were saying that people were shot and killed on that block specifically, and they were worried about young people being on the block. And now, about 2 weeks ago, they had come to us and said, since you've been here, nothing has happened on this block. And so that goes into why we believe that when you invest in places where you are, that the safety looks different and it becomes different. So yeah, you're always going to have your issues in certain neighborhoods, but when you're really putting money into the areas where you are, things change. And so we are received very well. We often have people say, I don't live in that area, but I come up here because y'all are nice. Like, I like the way I like having conversations with you. I can stop by and get a gun lock. I can stop by and get feminine hygiene products. Like, we don't advertise everything, but I think we've done a good job of creating a culture of, if you show up and knock on the door, we don't know you, but we can help you get to where you need to go.
And I think that's speaks a lot to what y'all are doing, that folks had tensions but then just saw how you were showing up, and y'all built that trust. And I also love that you're calling out like the feminine products like pet care. These are things that people don't usually think about when it comes to mutual aid. And I know for me, like going through the pandemic, like having my pets to like comfort me is so important. And if I had to make that decision between like having to feed myself or my cat, like that those problems happen. So I'm really
Yeah.
excited that y'all are focusing on that. Um, Another coalitional campaign, we mentioned the Care Not Control, but another one that many of the leaders here are part of is the Shift the Narrative campaign. So I just wanted to ask folks who are part of that, how are y'all challenging how the media covers mass incarceration and community and state violence? And why do you think it's important? So I'll ask Katia first.
Just first to shout out Kendra to all the stuff y'all are doing at Yeah Philly. I'm just like remembering just a lot of stuff from like me being a teenager, and I'm just saying, like, things were rough back then. And like, there was even a point when I was a teen that I had to like steal tampons. Do you get me? And the fact that y'all are like giving that out is just like, oh, my heart's just like, oh, love it. So shout out to y'all for that because it's like it's the little things that can get you in trouble, right? And it's just like basic stuff, right? Now shifting back to shift the narrative, right? So shift the narrative. I think Kris, you're more involved with like the coalition itself, but from my understanding, it's just like it's definitely making sure that the narrative that's portrayed in the media, not just about like campaigns about defund or things like that in the city, but also just how things are reported, on the Inquirer, how people are mentioned. Do reporters say the word criminal, right, in the reporting, or do they actually just name folks, actually say people and things like that? The point is like the way in which we talk about this is going to shape public opinion. So shift and out is definitely about making sure that we do the work to shift that, to make sure that those that are communicating this to the public are doing it in a way that humanizes folks and is not using the same, language that criminalizes people. But I'm just going to send it off to you, Kris, just more your insight on shift the narrative.
I think one of the things that we see with language and the language that media use, um, I think one of the first things that comes to mind was that really awful headline last year in the Inquirer, "Buildings Matter Too," which was like in response to the uprising, in response to people, being outraged and fighting for, like fighting in defense of Black lives. Um, and so it's about media using language that is humanizing, that is accurate, not just talking to the cops about a crime, about a situation, and having that be the only voice in an article, but also to community members, not just talking about crimes and homicide spikes, which like really make people feel less safe. But also talking about the good things that are going on in our neighborhoods, the ways in which our communities are showing up for each other. Um, and then also, part of it is creating our own media and making sure that we're able to tell our stories, making sure that, people in our communities are able to talk about the things and frame these issues in the way that they talk about them in the way that makes sense to them. Um, and so, like I think one of the big things in addition to the Everyday Philadelphians When I Defund the Police videos that we made last year, uh, our podcast has really been a space where we've been able to do some of that storytelling, and really be able to hear from people in our movement directly. It's called Move It Forward if people want to check it out.
That's Thank you for highlighting that. I think it's like really important, and that's like such a gross like headline to see, and kind of like shows how a lot of times in the media we prioritize like physical property instead of human lives. And earlier folks talked about like who gets to own and carry guns for self-defense. I think like when we look at the media, like when it's black and brown youth, like it's covered in a very different way than, let's say, like white folks in an open carry rally, or storming the Capitol. Even it's given a lot more nuance. It's more tempered, and like I'll tell you, when I put on the news, it's all kind of like bad things about my community. So that's why I think it's like really important for campaigns like this. Also, why it's really important to have community media like Philly Cam, to have programs like this one where we're involving more folks, and that's more independent from the media players that are usually around. I do want to give us like a little bit, if y'all have any upcoming events and campaigns that we're not thinking about. I think YASP, I think y'all might be having an event coming up. Can you tell me a little bit about that, Mai?
Yeah, so we got Dad's annual cookout on Saturday. The whole community is welcome. Food, music, and everything will be there. I just coming out for a good time. Usually we have it every year, but last year we wasn't able to because of the pandemic. But this year we're able to. So it's Saturday from 1 to 4. We'll be having a gas cookout, and everybody is invited.
Yeah, and I do love these. Like, I love that we're being able to see each other again. It's a totally different experience to be in person and in relationship with people than being on Zoom. It's definitely something I've been hearing from a lot of organizer friends. Yeah, Katia, or Kris, or Kendra, like, if y'all got anything else that you want to shout out as we're wrapping up.
Yeah, I think even the more longer term policy things that we're working on, like we're working to change state legislation around birth certificates, because right now in Pennsylvania you have to be 18 to order your own birth certificate, but even beyond that, when you order one, like your credit card that you pay for it online has to match the address that you're at. And if you're disconnected from your family, it has to be a family member or guardian that lives with you to order the birth certificate if you're not 18. So things like this that need to be changed at the state level, because it shouldn't matter what age you are. If you need your birth certificate to start working and you can get your working papers at 14, you should be able to get your birth certificate. We're also thinking long term about sharing people's experiences of being on probation and what it's like when you're out somewhere and your ankle monitor goes off and you have to yell through your monitor that you're at your program because your GPS PO didn't put in the time frame that you were out. So things like this that I think we're trying to put together so that the public becomes aware of the actual experiences of what it's like day to day being on supervision, being under supervision, and coming out of places and saying, oh, you have all these resources when you really don't. Young people are connected to teams of 6 people at least through DHS, through KUA, through probation, and they still have nothing that they need. And so for us, that shows us that we need to change that team, right? Like we should not be focusing on that team of people for this instance. So we're trying to put together different documentaries, different podcasts with young people just speaking about their experiences. And hopefully, the probation is more longer term, but it needs to be exposed in terms of how harmful it really is to young people and how, they're partnering with police and kicking down doors and breaking people's arms in their houses when they're serving search warrants. So these are the things that we like to put together and work on, because it's the real experience that I think oftentimes the public is really not aware, or when you don't see it, it's like it's not happening.
Um, I was just gonna say, I was just gonna include that over at Reclaim Philadelphia in the Mass Liberation Task Force, we're doing some deep canvassing throughout the month of October for the weekend of the 16th and the following weekend. We're focusing in West Philadelphia, and the main focus of this is to make sure we have these conversations, right? What is mass liberation? What does community safety mean to you? But also make sure we have these deep conversations so that, folks don't always equate safety with like, the criminal system, right? The criminal legal system, making sure that we have this conversation where our community and our neighbors, we start talking about like the fact that the city needs to make some long-term investment, right, into youth programs, into more jobs, into affordable housing, if they actually want to see a community where crime goes down and then you actually have people prospering. So we are looking for volunteers to help knock on doors. We will receive training. For more information, just go to reclaimphiladelphia.org/mass-liberation. But yeah, we definitely need folks. We need volunteers to make sure we are having these conversations with people, because we need to make sure that there is increased support for mass liberation.
Thank you so much, and definitely like follow all of these organizations online. Amistad, I'm sorry, if definitely follow Amistad Law online to find out about their future campaigns. I can tell you that I'm feeling really grounded from this conversation and in this panel. Hopefully, folks watching this are starting to get that spark of joy that comes from imagining a new world together. And I just want to say, from all of us at Reimagine, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next month after the November general election. So if you haven't already, please register to vote. Thanks everybody for joining us together. And yeah, we'll see you next month.
You're tuned to WPPM LP Philadelphia 106.5 FM, PhillyCam Community Radio, and PhillyCam TV, also streaming live to Facebook. Thank you for tuning in to Reimagine, a partnership between Reclaim Philadelphia and PhillyCam.